Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Free Thought Forum, and this is my rant. We often hear speeches on TV about the State of the Union by various politicians touting what a terrible job the other guy and other political party has done, but what a cop-out that really is. Everyone contributed to making it this way. What we have here is no union. It's just a bunch of spoiled, powerful elected officials making deals in back rooms. When we talk about the union, we are not just talking about the 50 states, but we're also referring to the union of people within the United States. Our government is supposed to be all about politicians and elected officials working together, not shutting down the federal government like little babies because they did not get their own way. Our politicians are not really working within the Constitution and giving us, the people, okay, a government for the people and by the people. Those morally corrupt, in my opinion, elected officials have turned our system of government into a government for the politicians in spite of the people, like you and me. They act like little spoiled children that always get their paycheck regardless of whether or not they are working. Now, in my opinion, I doubt if more than 10% of the multi-term, re-elected backroom dealers that have traveled the D.C. Beltway are truly understanding and work solely for the country and the people that put them in office. But who is mainly to blame for our country right now, the mess that it is in, our economy? Well, I know you're going to say the Democrats. No, not the Democrats, and it's not the Republicans either. You, yes, that's right, you are to blame for re-electing the same incompetent jerks year after year that don't give a damn about you or this country as long as they get their fat paychecks and sometimes questionable contributions. In my opinion, okay? What is truly laughable in Washington, D.C. is to hear some politicians spouting off about how terrible it is that those godless heathens and infidels are taking God out of our schools and Jesus Christ out of Christmas. They're even trying to take prayer out of government. The non-believers are corrupting our Christian nation and making God angry. That's why things are so bad in America. We are not to blame. Wink, wink, nod, nod. You would expect that when a person runs for office and wins an election, then that person should be qualified. They should be self-sufficient, honest, and moral. If a person has to pray while working and ask for God's help in order to do his job, then he's incompetent and misrepresented himself when he was running for office. I do not want his personal God helping him or her while at his or her desk when working on a job for me or for this country. Stop praying on my time and the taxpayers' money. You only pray to make yourself look good anyway and God-fearing. Considering the poor moral record of most of these politicians and the other dirty deeds exposed in the press every day, if they truly believe in their God, then they should first zip up their fly and then get down on their knees at home, in the closets, and pray in private for forgiveness. Of course, if they want a little edge, they could also pray at that time to their God how to do their job. You should not expect your God to give you on-the-job training on taxpayer time and money and fix and bless a country that you broke. It's no wonder that in public polls, our government has the lowest approval rating in many decades. So you must also think that our politicians are broken and probably corrupt and incompetent, just like I do. Of course, to be fair and honest, I believe that there are some truly honorable politicians out there. But it's so hard to tell when everyone is wearing a neon halo over their head and keeping their fingers crossed behind their back when they speak. It's time to start over with some new faces and new ideas. You, the person that is ultimately responsible for the condition of our great country, vote out all those incumbent politicians of every party. Take a chance. If they start talking about God, be afraid. Be very afraid. Many self-proclaimed Christians seldom act as good and honest as you expect. Now, I realize that it is easier to live with the devil you know than take a chance with one you don't. Natural. But get rid of them all. Get a fresh start. It's about time. Yes, it will be tough at first, getting things straightened out, but it certainly will send a message to the good old boys that you are mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore. Consider that 98% of all the people incarcerated in this country claim to have a belief in God, and many of them, you'll have tattoos on their arms and Jesus all over their body and crosses and everything. Then that leaves only 2% that are incarcerated that do not believe. Now, if you figure this into the population of America, then that means that atheists and agnostics are by far the most honest and moral segment of our population, bar none. Maybe it's time to test this and vote for some non-believers for public office. It's also time for some non-believers to step up to the plate and have the guts to run for office with full disclosure. It is time for a non-violent voting revolution in this country of the free. Get off your butt and vote for change in the next and following elections. Get rid of all parties. Okay. Now that I've alienated just about everybody, and the NSA and the CIA and the FBI are probably putting a permanent tap on my phone, yea, verily as I speak, it's time to go on to another subject. Stay tuned for opening credits of the Free Thought Forum. Back in 30 seconds. Roll 'em. Well, welcome back. I feel so much better after getting that off my chest. I really dislike what all the political parties have become over the decades, you know. This is the people's country, and I'm tired of paying $15 a pound for a steak. And you just go in the grocery store and you should have to have take an antidepressant or something to relieve the stress before you walk in the supermarket because prices are so high. But anyway, this is the Free Thought Forum, brought to you by PA Nonbelievers, Inc., a 501c3 non-profit organization. We are dedicated to free speech, the separation of church and state issues, and also to voicing the danger of improperly used religion in our society. Everyone has the right to worship and pray to whatever God they believe in, but do not have the right to bully or coerce others to believe as they do. A concept and constitutional right that many wish to ignore in this supposed Christian nations. I would first like to introduce my co-host. This is Jacob, and his ears are probably burning listening to me rattling off at the mouth. I am Doug, Dastardly Doug, and so, moving on. I have a question for you. Who watched the new series on Fox TV Sunday, excuse me, Cosmos? For those that are unaware of it, this is a totally new remake of Carl Sagan's original series that he did, I believe, back in the 70s. Except this is hosted by the world-renowned scientist, astronomer, and teacher, Neil deGrasse Tyson, an absolute giant in his field, and with an on-camera presence like few others. This first episode excuse me, introduced the young and the old alike to the latest wonders of the universe. If you missed last Sunday's breathtaking episode, watch this short 3-minute preview of what is to come. It'll blow your mind. Jim, roll the preview, please.
The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Our contemplations of the cosmos stir us. We know we are approaching the grandest of mysteries.
It's time to get going again.
Wow. Now, wasn't that great? Normally we do not do promos of other TV shows, but this to me was an exception since it was so good, and it also represents what PA Nonbelievers is all about: education, reality, the way things are, and a program that will open your eyes to the wonders of the universe, while you can either believe in your creator, or like us, you say that you don't know who made it. It works both ways without insulting either side. If you would like to discuss future Cosmos episodes that go air on Sunday night and on Fox, and Monday on National Geographic, give us a call. And
it's also available online at the Fox website for those of us who work night shift and can't catch it live.
Oh, very good. I didn't pay attention to that. I was just so blown away by the program itself. Excuse me. What did you think of it yourself?
I think it's something that Carl Sagan would be proud of, that he would definitely approve of. Where it's the original Cosmos, I think, was in the early '80s, and it definitely needed a facelift. It was such a great program. A lot of the information from the original program is still very relevant, but I think it's something. The remake was definitely necessary.
Well, all the newer graphics that we've got now, the technical know-how that we've gained since Carl Sagan made his. I mean, it makes the production out just breathtaking. Yeah. And you know, like I said, you can look at that if you're a excuse me, a religious person, and you can say, oh, okay, yeah. God made the Big Bang, or God caused the evolution, and God did this, and God did that.
That was actually the point of part of the original episode, was talking about how the first astronomers who believed that the universe was much bigger than what they saw with the naked eye, they had no problem reconciling that, because they believed that they had an infinite God, so why not have an infinite universe? Yeah. Now, that wasn't well met by the established religion at the time, but they certainly felt it no challenge to their own faith. Yeah. And that really continues today with scientists like Dr. Kenneth Miller, who testified against intelligent design in Kitzmiller versus Dover, still is a very devout believer. Yeah. And because he doesn't believe in setting limitations on his God, but I think, I mean, Carl Sagan as a person was definitely an inspiration, and I think they couldn't have picked a better person to do the facelift than Neil deGrasse Tyson. Oh God, no. He's as you said, a wonderful communicator. I've seen a lot of his speeches on YouTube. And if you ever have the chance to look on YouTube, just search Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you can see a lot of his speeches, not just about science, but sometimes he's just out there expressing ideas in no particular order, and he's a very thoughtful man.
He's a born communicator. Right. He really is. And let's see, what the heck was the guy's name? Giordano Bruno was the first person to think that the universe was infinite, and I was the second, I think. But anyway, at least I wasn't burned at the stake for saying it by the Catholic Church like poor Giordano Bruno was. I mean, it was pure heresy.
Yeah, and 10 years later, Galileo almost suffered the same fate. Yeah, it was. I mean, but it's really hard to tell who was the first people to argue about particular scientific facts. Like when I first actually started looking into the science behind evolution, I was stunned to learn how old the idea actually was. It's been around for ages and ages, and it was just really, it wasn't something conjured up by Darwin one day. It was, Darwin was the one who really figured it out and figured out the mechanics behind it. Similarly, there were many people who had different ideas about the cosmos. It was just the first people to gain notoriety is usually who we talk about. And I love the one line in the beginning of the show where he said, "The journey to understand who we are." Well, it was something like, "It's a journey. It's a long journey that's involved many heroes."
Yeah.
And you know, you talk about people like Bruno or Galileo or Newton, who, well, Sir Isaac Newton, who Thomas Paine noted, there was talked a little bit about the Age of Reason, where he said, had Newton lived a couple hundred years before he did, he may not have lived to finish his research.
Oh yeah, the thing is that the same thing is true of free thinking or free thought. Okay, there was plenty of people like us that were hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago, that had these absolutely new and exciting ideas about both about God and the universe, and what went on in their own mind. They did thought experiments with themselves and with their followers. People today think that, oh yeah, these atheists, these free thinkers, these humanists, this is something that has just started recently. But you know, it started over 1,000 years ago, thousands of years ago, where people wanted their mind to be free and to have the right to think differently. And unfortunately, that's one of the first things that the church, and initially the Roman Catholic Church, absolutely forbade. Was you can't even think anything negative, because God can read your mind. So don't you dare do it.
Right.
And
it really didn't stop at the Catholic Church. The second Martin Luther took over, he was doing the same thing. The second the Calvinists showed up, they were doing the same thing. As Aaron Ra once commented, the Puritans came to America seeking religious persecution, but they brought it with them.
Yeah, first thing they did was persecute everyone else.
And as Neil deGrasse Tyson referred to them in Cosmos, they were the thought police. Which I thought was, and one thing about Carl Sagan was, you read through his books and he was very, very anti-religion in his books. They're talking about, it makes it so frustrating to hear some of these Christian apologists to try to say that Christianity is responsible for modern science. It's appalling. But one of the things also that I thought was a very touching part at the end of the first episode of Cosmos was Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about the teaching of the passing of the torch from one generation to the next. And that was really embodied by Neil deGrasse Tyson doing Cosmos, because he told a story when he was 17, he actually got to meet Carl Sagan in person.
I didn't realize that, and I thought, oh, I would have done anything to be able to have met him.
Yes, and you know, Carl Sagan took time out of his day to show Neil deGrasse Tyson around I think it was one of his labs at Cornell University. And when it was time for Tyson to go home, it was snowing pretty badly, and Carl Sagan gave him his number and said, if you can't get home, call me and we'll take you in for the night.
Yeah, I mean, talk about just totally blowing your mind.
I mean, if you ever watch Carl Sagan, he was all heart. He was so inspiring to listen. Not just a brilliant man, but a great person as well.
And wasn't he so soft-spoken too?
Yeah.
You know, and you almost had to lean forward and really pay attention, even though you could hear him. But he had this sort of a voice that drew you closer.
Yeah.
So,
if you look at the biggest advocates in science and even atheism, they're all very soft-spoken.
Mm-hmm.
You know, first you had Carl Sagan, then Neil deGrasse Tyson is pretty soft-spoken himself. He's not outdoing him. Especially Richard Dawkins. I don't know if his voice ever goes above a certain decibel.
No, I've met him. I've had a drink with Dawson too, actually at an Atheist conference, and you can't cut through his English accent with a knife. You think that I sound English? You should hear him. Oh, son of a gun! But he's a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant.
Or also people like Sam Harris, he's a really quiet guy himself. So it really is the case. You don't have to be such a loud, colorful figure to be a great communicator, to be a great scientist. Although, I mean, not to say that there's no place for that. I mean, you also have people like Bill Nye the Science Guy, who was really inspiring, and he was a lot more flamboyant than maybe some of the other communicators of science. But I mean, he still got a good point across.
Yeah, one of the very small books that I really enjoyed was his Letter to a Christian Nation, and it was great for people, the religious people, to read and get a non-inflammatory, simple explanation of the way that non-believers are and why they think the way that they do. That's so. There's really an awful lot of good scientists, public speakers out there. It's just a question of opening your mind. Okay, we'll just change the subject out there. I don't know how many of you are aware that CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee, for, I guess, what they call them, moderates or conservatives, had their annual convention over this past weekend. The Conservative Political Action Committee is the largest and oldest gathering of conservative, and is run by the American Conservative Union, and was held at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center in Maryland, National Harbor, March 6th of this year to March 8 over the last weekend. And last year even brought together thousands of activists to listen to dozens of Republican leaders speak about everything from economics and foreign policy, and it's also considered the required stop for Republican presidential hopefuls, and is open to anyone that can afford it. Now, American atheists could afford it and wanted a table at the convention where they could just sort of hand out literature, and submitted the application and $3,000, and was approved. Well, the decision to include American atheists outraged some conservative, with many taking to Twitter to voice their disapproval. But don't take my word for it. Watch this MSNBC explanation of what happened. Jim, please roll the CPAC MSNBC footage.
The Conservative Political Action Committee, commonly known as CPAC, is gearing up for its annual meeting next month at the Gaylord Resort in Maryland. And the one thing that CPAC had to do this week, as the great event approaches, is rewrite its imaginary rules about who can participate. Since there are no real rules about who can participate, rewriting their imaginary rules can be quick and easy, as it was today. They did it in hours when they suddenly decided that an organization, American Atheists, could not participate. American Atheists had come up with the $3,000 necessary to secure booth number 439 in the exhibition hall. There are some bigger, more expensive booths which have been rented by bigger, richer organizations like the National Rifle Association and the Tea Party Patriots, but the Atheists booth was a standard-sized booth in a great location right beside the Republican National Committee booth, which is the same size as the Atheists booth. CPAC was happy to take the Atheists' money because, as Megan Snyder, spokeswoman for CPAC, told CNN.com, conservatives have always stood for freedom of religion and freedom of expression. If you didn't know that conservatives, and specifically CPAC, have always stood for freedom of religion and freedom of expression, you're not the only one. Other CPAC participants had no idea that conservatives have always stood for freedom of religion and freedom of expression, because they don't, as CPAC then proved decisively. Tony Perkins is a conservative who has never stood for freedom of religion and freedom of expression, as he proved once again today. Perkins, who spoke at CPAC in 2012, said in an email to CNN today, "Does the American Conservative Union really think the liberties and values they seek to preserve can be maintained when they partner with individuals and organizations that are undermining the understanding that our liberties come from God?" Thomas Jefferson warned against such nonsense. Well, in fact, Thomas Jefferson warned against the nonsense that Tony Perkins peddles. Many conservatives mistakenly believe that Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "Without God, liberty will not last." The very first time Thomas Jefferson said that was in 1966, when that quotation, 1996, when that quotation was invented in an article by Thomas G. West, "The Conservatism of the Declaration of Independence." The quote has been debunked as false, but that won't stop conservative Christians from clinging to it. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation notes that quotation has not been found in any of the writings of Thomas Jefferson. In debunking that quote, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation notes that he said something about God and liberty in Notes on the State of Virginia, where Jefferson wrote, "Can the liberties of a nation be though secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath?" Now, notice carefully here, you'll notice that Jefferson does not say that the liberties are the gift of God, or that Jefferson thinks they are the gift of God. What he says is that a firm basis for our liberties, for maintaining our liberties, is the belief in the minds of the people that our liberties are the gift of God. You can't tell from that line whether Jefferson himself believes in God, but you can tell that Jefferson believes that the best way to keep our liberties secure is for the people who do believe in God to believe that they would incur God's wrath by violating our liberties. In Jefferson's view, those liberties include freedom of religion and freedom of expression, which of course includes the freedom to express that there is no God. Jefferson wanted people to believe that if they interfered with the freedom to express anything, including atheism, that God would be unhappy with them, not just a constitution. If they interfered with the free expression of atheism, they would incur God's wrath. That's what Jefferson wanted them to think. So when Tony Perkins tries to cite Thomas Jefferson to support his intolerance, he is simply lying about Thomas Jefferson. But it is very unlikely that Tony Perkins knows he's lying, because it is very unlikely that Tony Perkins knows any of Thomas Jefferson's actual thinking and writing about religion. If Tony Perkins could have asked Thomas Jefferson what he thought of atheists having a booth at CPAC, Jefferson would have told him, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God." That's another line that Jefferson wrote in Notes on the State of Virginia. And here's more. Reason and free inquiry are the only effectual agents against error. Nothing there about God showing you the way to the truth, just reason and free inquiry. Jefferson went on to say, difference of opinion is advantageous in religion. Tony Perkins certainly doesn't think that difference of opinion is advantageous in religion, and now CPAC doesn't think so. As soon as they heard that Tony Perkins doesn't think so, CPAC will allow no difference of opinion on religion now that Tony Perkins has objected to the presence of people who have a difference of opinion on religion. Jefferson wrote his Notes on the State of Virginia years before the Constitutional Convention, when most states still had established religions. Jefferson hated that and was very jealous of Pennsylvania and New York because they had no legally recognized religions at all. Jefferson admired the boldness of Pennsylvania and New York for making that choice. The experiment was new and doubtful when they made it. It was answered beyond conception. They flourish infinitely. They do not hang more malefactors than we do. They are not more disturbed with religious dissensions. On the contrary, their harmony is unparalleled and can be ascribed to nothing but their unbounded tolerance. Unbounded tolerance. That is not what Tony Perkins is famous for, and it is certainly not a value represented at CPAC. Thomas Jefferson added, "Let us reflect that the world is inhabited by 1,000 millions of people, and that these profess probably 1,000 different systems of religion, that ours is but one of that 1,000. That is not something Tony Perkins reflects on, and that is not something that will be reflected at CPAC. Hours after welcoming the atheists to CPAC today and saying conservatives have always stood for freedom of religion and freedom of expression, the poor CPAC spokesperson, Megan Snyder, had to say that the atheists would be getting their money back for the booth number 439, and they were not welcome because American atheists would not, quote, engage in positive dialogue. You know the positive dialogue that CPAC is just famous for.
More background checks? Dandy idea, Mr. President. Should have started with yours.
No, the only evidence they have for the Republican war on women is apparently that some taxpayers don't feel obliged to pay for Sandra Fluke's birth control. I think that haircut is birth control enough.
With Obama, you have a guy who wants to remake the space agency into an international outreach agency for Muslims.
See, people go to CPAC, a lot of young people, to engage in a festival of condemnation of the vast majority of Americans, including many Republicans who do not agree with the extremist right-wing and libertarian CPAC agenda. Those people have a lot of fun at CPAC, but they do not have one moment, not one moment, of positive dialogue with anyone they disagree with. When Tony Perkins and CPAC are kicking the atheists out of the building, they really should not be pretending that Thomas Jefferson would be cool with that. They should not try to rewrite Thomas Jefferson.
Well, what do you think of that, huh? Now, I couldn't have said that better myself. In fact, I wish that I had said it. But when I saw that on MSNBC, I said, I got to play that on our show because that just absolutely tickled me pink.
Right, it was actually, I think it was a writing of Thomas Jefferson when he was clarifying what was meant by the First Amendment. That's where he explicitly said to build up a wall of separation between church and state.
Yeah.
It was, and you know, conservatives misusing the Founding Fathers is nothing new. For example, Glenn Beck is notoriously for trying to rip off Thomas Paine, which is funny because Thomas Paine was very anti-religious to the point he was extremely against religion, and he supported a lot of liberal agendas. Yet you see a guy like Glenn Beck trying to imitate Thomas Paine, even though he has nothing to do with him. But yeah, I still commend David Silverman for still going to the event.
Yeah, I mean, American Atheists were not able to get their booth, their table, but Dave Silverman, the president of American Atheists, said, that's not going to stop me, and I'm going anyway, and going to schmooze and talk to everyone and still get the message across without having a $3,000 booth.
Right. And actually, I've been following his Twitter feed over the last few days just to try to see what's going on, and he's really gotten a mixed response. I mean, you could imagine there's going to be a lot of negativity towards him there, and that's expected. But he's gotten a lot of backing, even by some of the more very conservative or even Christians there, because when it comes to separation of church and state, there are still a lot of conservative Christians that can be allies there.
Yeah.
Because they obviously don't want the government meddling in what they're doing, because they realize it's easy. You know, if it's easy for them to assert a type of religion, even just a type of Christianity that they don't approve of.
Well, half the Christian religions don't approve of other Christian religions anyway. So
right. I mean, you have the Catholics and Protestants kind of at odds with each other at times. You know, the Baptists and the Pentecostals have a bit going against each other. Like, it's funny because I'll watch Jerry DeWitt, who was a former Pentecostal preacher, and Matt Delahunty, who was training to be a Baptist preacher. And even now, they'll kind of rib each other over their former beliefs. Even though they're both atheists now, there's still kind of that there. But I mean, David Silverman's been posting a bunch of pictures where he's actually been talking to the Tea Partiers and talking to the more conservative groups, and I think he really is serious about engaging in positive dialogue. You know, and I think just because maybe you come out harsh against somebody now and then, that doesn't mean you're not interested in dialogue. Sometimes you do need to let off some steam, or let off a rant sometimes.
Yeah.
But
this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, hopefully, like that. So, and this is sort of what we guarantee here is free speech, not free speech necessarily, or only free speech that we like, but also we have to tolerate the free speech that we don't like. Otherwise, all free speech goes out the window.
Yeah. And but I think there's a much larger point to be addressed here, though. Well, not larger than free speech, but about American Atheists going to CPAC. I really like what David Silverman is trying to do here, and that is to first acknowledge that there is a conservative base in atheists, where I think around 16% identify as conservative, and a substantial number, I should say, I think it's somewhere around 50% of atheists identify as being a fiscal conservative. And I think if Republicans could realize that there are a lot of non-believers who would support your fiscal agenda, at least to some degree, maybe not the entire agenda, but maybe prefer it, that even on some of the social agendas, like such as gun control, there are a lot of atheists who do support the right to bear arms, or at least responsible gun ownership. The key word, responsible. And I think it's mostly the heavy religious and the part of the conservative agenda embedded in religion is what drives a lot of atheists away. That even if they agree on them on a lot of other points, they simply just cannot vote for this person because of their religious agenda. And I think if conservatives just started to drop that a little, tone down the religious part of it, they could definitely get a lot more atheist support. And I think it also, there's a flip side to this where not only, well, actually I've already stated both sides, where it's not only just getting the conservatives to acknowledge that you have common ground with atheists, but the atheists to realize that there are conservatives and atheists. Where I heard him on the podcast Dogma Debate a couple weeks ago talking about it, where he was saying that, let's see if I can remember what he said correctly, where he said, actually I just lost it.
You'll come back.
Yeah, I know, but he was talking about just the, they're just talking about how many conservatives there are in atheism. And for me personally, I think it's. Oh yeah, now I remember what it was. The comment he made was, you have all these. About 50% of atheists identify as fiscal conservatives, or at least say smaller government, which flies in the face of the stereotype that atheism is responsible for communism. So I think it's about getting that point out there. And I think you also don't want to drive conservatives away from the atheist movement, where an atheist might come to the movement and think that everybody's a far left-wing liberal by the way they talk sometimes, where that's simply not the case. We have a lot of different viewpoints. Atheist is just an agreement about one question. And I think
atheists, when you say the word atheist or agnostic, you tend to get categorized and thrown into one lump sum, one bag, and that everyone thinks the same, has the same values, and there's not a single difference between any atheist that's out there. And the atheists are just as diverse and different as the whole American population are. There's no two people that are exactly alike, just the same as there's no two atheists that are exactly alike.
And that's part of the reason I sometimes like the label free thinker a little better. Yeah. Because we're not going to hold to one opinion, and I think it was I've heard several different versions of the quote. But it was Ronald Reagan. Again, I've heard several different versions of this quote. I haven't been able to confirm which is the correct one. But some have said, like, someone who agrees with you 80% of the time is not a 20% traitor. Where it's like, and that's the kind of quote. I don't care who said that. That's really good advice. Yeah. Where even if you disagree with someone, we can have our disagreements about certain issues. And for example, maybe I'll agree with the conservative agenda on this, and this, but not on this, and it just depends on what the candidate is focusing on. Same on the liberal side. And And that's the same way all across the spectrum about many different points. And I think if you can realize that we have but I think in the secular community, in the atheist community, anything we appeal to has to be appealed to in the basis of evidence. You know, where it's not. We don't rely on any arguments from authority, any sort of what we think to be doctrinal issues. If we have, even if you support say maybe there's a conservative agenda that's deeply embedded in religion, there are times that there is a perfectly secular reason for it as well. But sometimes it's hard to see past that. And for example, like one time, I actually a couple weeks ago, I got into an argument with somebody. Actually, I won't even call it an argument. We actually had a very good discussion about issues related to food stamps. And my problem with him was he was opposing a regulation for food stamps, and he was coming out with some massive conspiracy theory about, oh, it's just Republicans not wanting to help the poor. And I was going, wait a minute, there's certain parts to this bill I actually agree with, because having worked in a grocery store, I see a lot of the abuse that goes on. And we talked about it for a while, and eventually I came to see the bill as actually being nonsense, but for a different reason, which we kind of realized halfway through the conversation. Hey, there's actually a different reason that actually is more is a better reason. It has a basis in evidence. And I eventually was like, okay, yeah, maybe this isn't such a good idea after all. But if you come out with like an authoritative argument or a conspiracy theory, nobody's going to listen to you.
No, because everyone gets their back up against the wall and they start bristling there, and now they just harden their heart, and no matter what you say, it doesn't come out.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen some atheist debaters do the same thing when they hear about certain terrible arguments that have been circulating. They get really, really angry because they realize that makes their job twice as hard. When it goes to talk about, why should we look at these different issues this way? When people hear the nonsense argument so many times, they think that this whole idea is just nonsense. And maybe that's kind of bad thinking, but you can't blame anybody for doing that, for rejecting if all you've heard is a bad argument for it time and time again. Which is, whenever I look at, reading and hearing about another Christian apologist, I don't always hear them out because I start hearing the same arguments again. I'm like, okay, this is the same batch of arguments. That's nonsense.
Well, I think that everyone is guilty of sort of tuning people out when you categorize people, and you say, well, he's an atheist, so I won't. His opinion doesn't count, or he is a Democrat, so we all know what Democrats stand for, or he's a Republican. They're not worth anything, and no one really listens anymore. You put labels on everything and assume that you know everything about that person, depending upon the label that you've put on them.
Well, I think the biggest problem is when you start to set up things as a dichotomy, which so many things that are represented as a dichotomy aren't. That's why with the quote I mentioned earlier, it's because maybe you're just a little conservative, or maybe you have maybe a middle ground stance, where maybe you're not as hard on an issue as some other people, but people seem to think that if you're a Republican, you're all the way to the right, and if you're a Democrat, you're all the way to the left. And that's not the case. There are a lot of moderates, a lot of in-betweens. I'm sometimes more like to label myself as an independent, because I've got viewpoints sometimes hitting both extremes, sometimes more in the middle, just trying to sort them out for myself. But the problem is people seem to want to try to represent everything as a one or the other choice.
Yeah.
Which it rarely is. Rarely is there a one or the other choice.
Someone once asked me when we were at I think it was at the York Mother's Day Fair, which is coming up. We'll be there on Mother's Day on the corner of yeah, my mind went back Beaver and Market Street, and you'll see our signs prominently displayed. But someone asked me, he says, wouldn't you be absolutely happy if they were to get rid of all churches and all religion, and you could just wave a wand and make them all go away? And I guess he expected me to say yes, but I replied, no, absolutely not. Although religion does not provide the non-believer, as it were, with happiness, it provides great happiness and support to the people that want to believe in it. So why should you want to take away something that makes so many people happy? The only thing that really the non-believers complain about is people trying to convert and coerce them to believe in their particular brand of religion. And the non-believers say, no, we don't want to believe in it. You worship who or what you want, and we'll go on our way. We won't bend your ear if you don't bend our ear. But
it's about, you have the right to do that. And there are lines, like sometimes the religious do things that could qualify as child abuse or denial of education. But there's also, when you're talking about some versions of Christianity I'm familiar with, there's really no harm in it, and it's would be wrong of us to promote free thought and say, no, you can't think that way. Mm-hmm. Within reason, of course, as long as it's not doing damage to other people. And I know, actually, I think Christopher Hitchens felt the same way, where he wouldn't get rid of religion if he had the chance to. Yeah. Even though he was a fierce debater against it, and I think he and Richard Dawkins parted way on this. Mm-hmm. But again, we can have our disagreements.
I'll say one last thing here. If I were to attend any church for any reason on a regular basis, I would choose a black Southern Baptist congregation. They have got to be the happiest people in the world when they are attending church. I mean, just listening to the choir alone is truly moving, and watching the entire congregation joining in can't help but raise your spirits, no matter how down that you may feel. Their religion promises camaraderie, charity, and belonging to something greater than just themselves. And a good Southern Baptist preacher can move a spirit better than any other clergy. So don't take what I say as an insult, but check out the Southern Baptist churches. So we're winding down to signing off. Tune in again in 2 weeks, and we'll be here again. Thank you for watching our show, and sorry you didn't call in.